Well, Happy New Year, Merry Christmas, and all that to everyone. Welcome back to Karate Ramblings. I'm Kieran McKenzie,
I'm Brian Bates, and
and
today we have. Go on, tell him, Kieran.
and today we've got our best friend Luke Whitworth on the chat with us. Hooray!
See if we're still best friends by the end of it.
Best friend. So speak for yourself.
And on today's chat, we've got an interesting little conversation for you. We want to talk about the old masters, that old chestnut, quite literally,
and their wisdom, all their
and
bullshit.
relevance in the modern karate community as well. So that'll be an interesting one. So, old masters, who are we talking about then?
Well, one that's been cropping up a lot at the moment, I've seen on Tinternet, is Matobu. Everyone seems to like him and his drills, and he seems to be, for me, if anybody talks about Teki or Naihanchi, they refer to Matobu. Like he's got all the answers. But I think the problem with all the old masters is there wasn't an awful lot recorded, was there?
Nah.
So I'm not sure we can take any. Well, you can take some of what is written down as okay. I'll use that, but I just don't think enough of what they did was recorded for us to take it as gospel.
Yeah, no, Matobu, yeah, he does crop up a lot. And we've been to quite a few Ian Abernethy seminars where he's talked about different drills that Matobu inspired and whatnot, and that he loved Teki, of course, the number one kata of all time, and that he was a bit more of a street fighter than the rest of the old so-called masters were.
Yeah, I mean, if we take his advice, we'd be going to bars, getting into fights, and visiting ladies of the night, wouldn't we?
Ooh.
Certainly advice from a slightly different era then. And I mean, this is sort of when sort of the wisdom of the old masters does pop up. That's sort of one thing I always try and bear in mind, is that wisdom does come from a very different era to where we are now. And karate then, or even self-defense, depends which way you want to look at it. Karate then probably had an entirely different viewpoint than sort of the karate that a lot of people practice today nowadays. And if you were to stick closely to what the old masters said and the techniques they taught and everything like that, depending on circumstances, and it does come back to context as always, but you could end yourself up in an awful lot of trouble if you just, well, this is what the masters say and this is what we do. And if you take it as gospel, this is what the masters say, and you don't actually think beyond this is what we've got recorded as the master saying, then you could potentially end yourselves up in a bit of a stew. So, it's for me, there's nothing wrong with referring back to what these masters said, what they've left behind, everything like that. It should be encouraged. It really should, but there should always be some actual thought behind it. It's not just taken as sacrosanct gospel that if they said it, it's unquestionable and above reproach because, well, for a start, things evolve. Everything evolves. Everything, I work in IT. There is no one still saying we must do things exactly the same way that people were doing it 10 years ago. Because you say that in IT and you're in trouble, right? Things change, the world changes around it, new techniques, we've talked about this.
So, do you think the enemy has changed as well? So the villains and the ruffians,
I think what you can get away with legally has potentially changed. There was no CCTV back in the world of old masters, right? So if they were face down unconscious in the dirt, it was your word versus them. And they're a known ruffian, right? It ain't going to be picked over on YouTube. It ain't going to be pulled apart in court from multiple different angles of you curb stomping someone because,
and that could have been a valid technique back then.
I mean, it might have been. Don't get me wrong. I think certainly, if it was just you versus someone, and that person meant to do you harm, you might have fought less, or worried less about
the consequences.
Absolutely. And compared to, I suppose, the old masters, the demographic also has changed a lot in karate. I mean, karate is done by everyone, just not a select few social elites on a small island off the coast of Japan.
Yeah. I think that I certainly think that the the amount of, but then it goes back to, like, there's a lot more known about sports science, about physiology, about long-term effects of training than there was back in, again, the ages of the old masters. Even go back to like the 70s, the training that's going on in this country in the
Yeah,
70s. A lot more is
pretty
known
awful.
that, that if you want to train as a lifelong pursuit, then you do need to make adjustments, and you can't just train in a way that is detrimental to that, is short-lived, that will do more damage longer term. A lot of the karateka we know from who have trained for a very long time have shot knees now, have arthritis, and all this from the trainings they did in those days. Again, I don't know how much attention that was paid to in the time of the old masters. Life expectancy was shorter back then as well, so there was less time for these things to fully realize.
Mm. Well, I was going to say that I think referring to maybe modern masters is a better idea. And if we're looking at self-protection, it's like Luke's talking about the law, that has changed massively from back then. I think your opponent has changed as well, and there are more modern masters. The people who say is the godfather or grandfather of modern self-protection is Jeff Thompson. And even from what Jeff was doing, things have changed. I think the biggest thing that he brought in was defence and preemption. And I think the masters would have been the old masters. Preemption, Funakoshi talked about that, didn't he? In his books. I wouldn't be able to quote him directly. I'm not as good as some people with their masters quotes, but it was preemption was a thing. Go first. Vince Morris, I'd say, a modern master. He's wrote that in his Rules of Combat. Is reaction. Action is faster than reaction. So that's basically go first. So I think even like modern combat sport, we could gain more, I think, or as much more. I'll say more from working with modern masters rather than trying to uncover the past and see what they did. Things have moved on.
See, I do think it is interesting when you say things like uncover the past, because for me, when I started doing karate, I was quite interested in the history, because I was interested in understanding how and when these ideas and techniques came about. But then as we progress more and more into practical karate, it's sort of, you're like, okay, so if we did this kata and this bunkai with this, like this, is this similar to what the old masters did? So I think it is a lot about people seeking validity for their own ideas and training methods. Like, if the old masters did it, it definitely worked. Not always, but it is about seeking that confirmation that, what you're doing now makes sense and works. But we have other ways to make sure that what we do works. Different pressure testing and peer review.
I think there is something to be said though for looking back on the lessons that were left from the masters in that time. So we've mentioned like Ian and his approach to his motobu inspired drills and sets. And the inspired part for me is sort of what the wider approach should be. It's looking at the lessons that master left behind and using them to inspire stuff that's practical and valid now, as opposed to looking at what someone's left and taking it as sacrosanct. Never change.
A modern approach.
A modern approach. But there's good lessons, and there's always good lessons to be found when you go back and look. But those lessons have to, I think, go through a modern viewpoint, unless you're very upfront. And then this is it. Some people, I'm learning this because it's the way this was taught hundreds of years ago, and I want that connection. But I think if you're teaching that to others, you've got to be very clear about the context that you're teaching it in that we are teaching this, but in modern times, this could get you arrested, kind of thing, or this might not be the best thing for continued practice into your 70s. Just those kind of lessons. So, like I say, that inspired part, I think, is good. You take the good learnings and you build stuff not fit for the modern age, but think of a better term than that, from the principles. And we talk a lot in the club about principles-based learning, and about how if you can understand the principles of things, you can then layer them onto a myriad of things to make them effective and to understand how they work. And I think that's kind of where, when we look at the teachings of the old masters, I think it's almost like, the principles of the old masters, rather than this is what they did. This da, da, da. No, these are the general principles they held things through, because principles can then literally come through and bubble up into all kinds of different strands of how you want to approach your modern day karate, your modern day martial arts.
Yeah, I think I've spoken with Bob and Andy on this before as well, and Bob came up with a good point. Sometimes he does, sometimes he don't. But I think if you're trying to do exactly what the old master did, it's for preservation of the art rather than progressing the art.
Yeah.
So I think there are certain associations that that they would want it handed down exactly the way it was passed down to them and passed on forward. So they want it unchanged, but nothing's ever going to be like that, is it?
No.
We've only got to look at Chinese whispers. I'll tell somebody something, and then it'll get passed down. So eventually, there will be something completely different than the original source anyway.
I always liked it likening to photocopying a photocopy of a photocopy. Sooner or later, I'm probably aging ourselves here by talking about photocopying. But yeah, certainly after a while,
what's that?
Yeah, that photocopy is just going to look washed out. All the original clarity around it's lost, and that is sort of and I did my time in the traditional martial arts world and enjoyed the practice of kata as a replica until I realized I didn't actually know as much about kata as I thought I did.
I was going to say, to be fair, you only have to look at the different styles, and it would have come from the original kata, wouldn't it? So if you look at, there's so many variations of Naihanchi or Teki that I've seen.
Yeah.
And then you look at the Hyan katas, as we would call it, the Hyan katas being Shotokan or Shotokan base, and then the Pinans. It's been the same base art, wouldn't it? Been the same base kata, but each master would have taken that lesson and added their own flavour to it.
They had, and then whether or not that flavour even got properly carried across, or the reasons for the change, reasons, and not being funny as well. Physiologically, I'm probably a lot different from someone on the Okinawan Islands a couple of hundred years ago. Probably a lot fatter for a start, but probably a lot taller. You know what I mean?
You've seen Matobu. He's a stocky guy. He's not very tall though.
He's not very.
And this is it. So he was built like a barrel, apparently.
There you go. I'm getting there, one beer at a time. But it's that as well. We check. You and I, Brian, have plenty of a discussion in the club about, well, I like doing this. Well, I don't. I like doing it this way, and it generally comes down to half the times because I'm a bit taller.
I try and be skillful and refined.
You're more skillful, and I'm just brute force and ignorance. So
I try. That's right.
But this is it. And even in our own club, that's two of us at odds at least once every week, if not every couple of weeks, about the correct way. And that's that's without a couple of hundred years of reinterpretation and everything like that. So it is where people say, oh, we do it this way because that's the way the masters handed it down. You would just love to get the masters in the room at some point just to look at it and go, what? I don't do it that way, do I? You know what I mean? It's just, which master? And it just strikes me as you're onto a hiding if you're trying to replicate
actually
something like that nowadays.
Thinking about it, with sports science and the rest of it, if we did bring them into this age, they might look at what we're doing now and think, actually, I like that. That's better. I'll use that. Because things, not a lot gets worse, does it? When you look at it. I'd say, well, okay. Combat sport though has definitely improved. People's knowledge of fighting, it's put under pressure a lot more than it was. I think so. That's a bigger thing with the internet, and you things Sky pay-per-view. So combat sport's massive now. So it must have got better.
Yeah, Okinawa had trade with China and Japan, and other influences worked their way across, but it wasn't exactly, I would imagine, worldwide influences at that point. He says, with little to no geographical history, brain cells in his brain. But you see what I mean? There's a lot more readily available information about different fighting styles to take account of. Like, you can easily watch, and we all do, you watch the One Championships, you're watching fighting straight from Thailand on a Friday night in your living room in England. I mean, so you can see how they fight. There's more information to process around those kind of things. So yeah, maybe the masters would just be like, oh yeah, I'm going to sit here on a Friday night drinking beer and watching other people fight. Get some answers then.
Absolutely. Certainly a lot more entertaining. So sports science as well, but also the idea, training ideas and safety as well. we're not, you know, brutalizing our opponent, our partners at every single training session. You know, everyone's kept nice and safe, and might end up with a bruise or two, but you know, we can practice. I don't know, the more street lethal techniques if you want, without having to hurt someone at all. Whereas back then, you know, if someone lost a tooth, you know, that might be considered your Tuesday.
Might be. I don't know. See, I don't know how much of that would these days be considered as bravado. In the, you know, you always, oh, the lessons were brutal, yada, yada, yada. Well, no one's going to go on history saying, actually, our lessons were a bit soft. Yeah, them down the road, they were losing 8 students a week. But ours, we just turned up to train. No one got killed. And we turned up again the next week. We, you know what I mean? It's like, actually, no, yeah, our lessons were really tough too. I don't know how much of that could have been one-upmanship and just history's inflation of facts. You know, don't get me wrong, we lost 8 students in the last week before Christmas, but we're struggling forwards. But you see what I mean? It always intrigues me, that kind of, you know, just how brutal was the training of old.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the sort of demographic that would listen to this, because it would go out on Kieran's channel, so I'm assuming it's younger than me. But you know, I can say the people of my age look back at if they trained in the 80s, you know, which I started as a 9-year-old in 1982, I think I started, or 1981. And everybody looks back at those times. I mean, I wasn't training in the 70s, but if I talk to anybody, the 70s, the 80s, it was brutal, you know. And I think you kind of look back at things with rose-tinted glasses as well. You look back and you think it was better than it actually was. You know, they did some stupid stuff. You know, I remember, like, we're talking about sports science, we used to go around doing bunny hops, you know, crouched down and hopping around the dojo, which is just terrible for your knees. We're saying we move on, we learn, you know. So, you know, doing what the masters did. I'm not saying people I trained with in the 80s were masters, but you know, I'm not going to carry on that practice because I know it's bad.
Yeah, you know, you'd have to wonder. I mean, when we talk about the masters, like, what were the state of their knees in their 40s, for example?
Well, they probably didn't do bunny hops around the garden or whatever. We did. They probably had more sense.
Yeah. And they had more active lives. You know, they were generally hardier people. You know, as a generation. You know, I spend more time sitting in this chair than I do most other things, that kind of thing. You know, it is just, we're softer. Our bodies can't take probably the level of training that they used to do, just as a matter of course, because we're starting from a few rungs down the ladder, maybe.
Yeah, true. I mean, as overall, I mean, I've got a desk job as well, sitting down all day. Do try and get up where I can and be as physically active as humanly possible, but you know, the 9 to 5 does creep up on everyone, unfortunately, and we're not exactly out tending fields or anything like that, or traveling so many miles on foot every day. You know, that old meme of, oh, my dad's trip to school was like going up mountains and battling goats and things like that.
For sure.
That was my trip to school.
Yeah, was it? Again, you're aging yourself there, Brian.
But yeah,
I mean, go on. I was going to say, do we really think we need to sort of hang on every word of the old masters? Then, personally, I don't. You know, I think it's.
I don't think we would take anything as sacrosanct. Anything anyone says. I mean, the funny thing as well is, if anyone came into our dojo and pronounced themselves a master in this day and age, we'd all have a good little chuckle about it the minute they left. I wonder how many of the masters would be almost embarrassed. Oh, you've held up as this absolute shining example. I don't think I'd want to be held up as an example of anything like 100 years after my death, mainly because it won't be anything good. But, you know, Funakoshi was on record as saying that, you know, karate has to evolve, has to change, and all of this. So
absolutely.
I don't know if there'd be an element of they'd almost be a bit embarrassed that what you're still listening to that.
Shit.
What have you spent the last 200 years doing that you're still holding up like that lesson where I turned up really hungover from being out fighting ruffians and scallywags and chasing women of the night? You know, that was a warm-up. It was a Thursday, and now you're still doing it. You know what I mean? It makes you wonder.
It absolutely. I mean, it for me, it's okay to have a dive in, look at what they say, maybe make a couple of notes. But if you're spending every single martial arts session you do, whether you're doing any sparring, whether if you're doing any grappling, striking, or if you're practicing on the pads, you're thinking to yourself, is this the way the old masters will do it? Well, absolutely not. No, that's just a big waste of time. And I think it's a big waste of mental energy when you could be furthering your art. I mean, like we were saying about combat sports, You know, instead of doing a kata and thinking, oh yeah, I understand this, yada yada yada. You know, you can go and apply it safely with a partner to see what actually does work, instead of thinking rather, oh, you know, this is it doesn't matter if it works or not because this is the way the old masters does it. No, it doesn't work like that.
This is it. You got to interpret. I think this is the thing. You know, it's martial arts, and you know, arts. Any kind of art, as far as I'm concerned, always has a bit of the person doing it themselves in it. You know, because if not, you're just literally copying it back to facsimile. So, music, for the people who are trying to get good at music, and you learn to play stuff off sheet music, and you play it as you're learning. You play it exactly right, but then you get the really good musicians who can add their own flourishes, who can change things. You know, like jazz musicians in that improv, in that world of like taking a theme and a structure and wrapping their own thoughts and their own musical flourishes into it, because it's an art, right? No one's shouting at them that masters didn't do the notes quite like that. You know, that kind of, that's applauded in those kind of those worlds. And so it's when I come back to that, it's sort of this idea is inspired by. As you get through that level of it, you should be looking at the lessons that were left as inspiration for furthering it. So you too could stand on the shoulders of the giants. You too can evolve, maybe work out something new, or at least enhance, refine, and go through that cycle. For me, that's sort of where the art side of things come into.
Yeah, I mean, if someone was
the combat things we do.
Yeah, if someone was screaming Miles Davis didn't exactly play the notes just like that, then you know, art's not going to evolve. Art will start to wither and die. So,
but you know, you just battering the jazz thing to death. Miles Davis was pretty much at the absolute top of his game, right? When he was everything's turning off in my house again today. When he was doing his thing, no one now is trying to note for note replicate Miles Davis, I would imagine, because it's been done. What's the point, you know? And that's kind of how I feel about all of this kind of thing. Is like, you know, people should be off finding their own thing, their own way, not trying to just replicate the people who have come before.
Yeah, I suppose again it goes back to whether you're trying to preserve, or you're like a historian preserving an art, but it's never going to be the same. Or you know, or you're a progressive martial artist, you know, and you want to better things, you know, better training methods, better, more effective in dealing with opponents, you know. So you know, whether you want to move on or whether you want to preserve an art, I think that's what it comes down to at the end of the day, isn't it?
Yeah. And whether you want to layer it into modern as the world changes as well, holding on to it as it was is no good, because the world has changed. The threats you might now meet are different. You know, no one's coming attacking you hopefully with a samurai sword, but they might with shorter blades. Like I say, they're kind of like rather big pointless differences, but you sort of see what I mean. It's that kind of. But then if all you're training for is to be a historian, then fine, fill your boots, right?
I suppose, you know, you're either laughing or you're not. Yeah. I suppose.
Yeah, just be honest about what you're doing, and not so much honest to yourself, but certainly honest to those you are teaching. This is passed down 200 years ago by a wise master. I walk into a dojo and someone tells me that, I'll be like, oh, right. So immediately I'm going to be looking for the holes as to why it's not valid in this day and age, because I'm contrarian, that kind of person. But yeah.
But I suppose you'd also be asking yourself, do I want to learn this history, have this history lesson? It's what you want out of your martial arts, isn't it? You know?
Yeah, because like I say, and it might be at the history lesson you learn a principle that's really good, right? You might learn something that actually you can bring into your thing. You might learn a new flourish that you can play on your trumpet. I'm really absolutely jazz euphemism now, but like I say, it might just spark an idea. So there's always value in things, but again, you've just got to be honest about what exactly it is you're doing and what you're teaching. And again, it's be honest to yourself, but be more honest to your students.
And that also plays into the evolution side of it as well. You know, you go here, you go there, you learn this, you learn that. You might learn something, a little tidbit out of the old masters, and then you add it into your own arsenal. There's nothing wrong with that. It's how you evolve. Yeah,
and you know, everyone's inspired by different sources, right? Everyone's there's a wealth of information. There's hundreds of years of information to be inspired by, but just don't be a facsimile. Don't just take, and also don't just take it all as bit. A master once said this. Okay, doesn't mean it's true for to the end of days, right? Always
You've
look
got to
at
find out if they actually said it as well, right?
Sorry,
You've got to find out if they actually said it as well. Because
if they were sober, because you know,
yeah, at the time, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that Bruce Lee said apparently, but
this is
you,
it.
you only have to troll the internet for memes, don't you? It's like, oh, Bruce Lee said this, did he?
Yeah.
You know, yeah. So there could be a lot of bullshit out there as well.
I
think
I'm still confused. What's a facsimile?
Don't you just you're too young, Shush. Don't be a copy, facsimile, copy from fax machine. Because we have to educate. Next talk will be us educating Kieran on things of yesteryear.
What's a fax machine?
Telegraphing punches.
Yeah, telegraphing punches. What's a telegraph?
It's off topic.
What's a
that came up in
telegraph?
class. Yeah, exactly. That actually happened in class. We said we talked about telegraphing punches. I can't remember who it was, but it was one of the younger students. Just said, "What does that mean? Telegraphing? What's a telegraph?" We then had to explain. Much to explain to your audience, Kieran. Actually, in fact, yeah, just leave a comment. You know, what's a telegraph if you're listening this far?
Yeah,
and maybe an answer. Maybe we won't.
we won't.
Well, it depends when the telegram reaches them, but
yeah, there we go. But yeah, this is it. It's just like I say. There's value in what the masters say for sure. Because value in what most people say, even if it's a good lesson, bad lesson, apart from what Kieran says. But other than that, like I say, this is why I always come back to I like inspired by, but I don't like they said this, we must hold true. Just doesn't hold any value to me. It almost feels lazy in this day and age as well, where new ideas are easy to come by. You know, add a little bit more into the mix. You know, if you're going to be doing this for a lifelong thing as well. Well, the master did it this way. Week 36, doing it this way. Week 736, still doing it this way. Really? You know, that's going to be an awfully dull martial arts life as far as I'm concerned. After 30 years of training, I'm doing things just the same as I was 30 years ago. Well, brilliant. Yeah. Time well spent, right?
That's not doing them a little bit better, though. You know.
Yeah, this is it, you know. And again, like I say, if that's your jam, then that's fine. Yeah. If nailing that foot position 1 micron slightly more perfectly in your eyes, then fair game to you. But I much prefer hitting someone in a new and excitingly funny way.
Right, guys, we're reaching towards the end of our allotted time.
This is a podcast or something. No, shush. It's mine now. This is a hostile takeover.
Closing thoughts, guys.
Don't be a copy or a facsimile. Yeah. Really.
What's a facsimile?
Yeah. No, just always. No. Yeah. Or don't take anything that anyone has ever said as sacrosanct, as absolutely beyond reproach. Nothing is. You know, make it work for you. If a master said do it this particular way, try and find out the wider picture of why they did. Those 3 little letters, WHY, can make all the difference, I think, in your understanding of your martial arts and your journey through it.
Yeah, I think what you said earlier, actually, Luke, I'm gonna take from Luke. So it's be inspired by them, but don't necessarily try and copy them. You know, so that's a good one. I think we'll have that.
Excellent.
And for me, I'd say, you know, speaking about Bruce Lee a minute ago, bring him back. You know, learn what is useful, discard what is useless, and add a bit of flair from yourself. So yeah, if you think you can learn something from an old quote or an old photo, by all means bring it in, play with it and evolve. Don't hold on to it just because it once existed. All right, well, I think that more or less wrapped us up, guys. So any plugs we want to throw in today?
No, just the usual. I'm sure my channel should be linked into this podcast. So Brian Bates Action Karate, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, God's sake. So, all of those.
Facsimiles, TikToks, Telegrams.
Telegrams, whatever, yeah. Brian Bates Action Karate.
And you can find me. I changed my Instagram handle again. You can find me at Mackenzie Karate. I decided to include my full name this time. So you can find me at Mackenzie_Karate, or if you search Kieran Mackenzie, you can find me one way or another. And Luke, we can find you in the
history books
pages
200
of history
years
books.
from now. No, yeah, in the
Yes,
history book 200 years from now, something I said today will be quoted completely out of context, but sacrosanct. So yeah, that's the way you're going to find me.
Yes, the quote. Don't quote me out of context. Said by Luke Whitworth.
I like
on
that.
today at whatever o'clock it is.
Definitely. Sounds good.
All right, guys. All
Cheers,
right. I think
gents.
that wraps us up for today. Thank you very much for listening, everyone, and we'll catch you on the next one. Take care.